I'm there now.
All right. I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting Tuesday, January 28th, 2025 at 4:34 p.m. Start with roll call. Alder Galvin.
Here.
Alder Johnson.
Here.
Alder Hinkfist.
Here.
And myself are present. I'll entertain motion of approval of the agenda.
Moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the minutes.
Moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. On to regular business. Number one, consideration with possible action for the resolution authorizing and providing for the issuance and establishing parameters for the sale of the not to exceed 25 million general obligation promissory notes series 2025A and all related details. Staff?
Well, let me start with, I would like to make some amendments to this agenda item. When I put these out on the agenda last week, I put it as a placeholder, and then as when we got the final resolutions, I forgot to update the information. So what I would like the agenda to say is consideration with possible action for the resolution authorizing and providing the issuance and establishing parameters for the sale of not to exceed $33,005,000 general obligation promissory notes series 2025, and this is some additional information, $10,385,000 of taxable general obligation promissory notes series 2025B and all related details. Again, we were waiting for the information. It came in on Friday, so I put a placeholder on Thursday, and then I forgot to update it when we published the agenda.
I made a motion to do that amendment.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion
And I'm going to tell you,
carries.
Diana, I was literally looking at this last night. I'm like, where is this number coming from?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
good to know.
So in your packet, what you're going to see is there are two pre-sale reports that came from Ellers for the two different breakdowns are the 33 million, or what they would call their general obligation promissory notes, which are exempt of borrowing. And we no longer have bonds; they are all notes. This is the 20-year notes, and then, these are notes. Some are 3, 8, 10, 20 years, and then we also have taxable. And the reason for the $10 million taxable borrowing, it is the pass-through loan to Newland for $8.5 million that was approved in a development agreement. And so that is why we have to separate that one as a taxable item. I don't know if you have any questions. We have Harry on the line from Ellers, and he could talk through the pre-sale reports if you have questions. These items were all approved at previous meetings for items that we were going to take through as their 2025 borrowing.
I mean, really just as a formality, this is just the action and the resolution necessary to actually issue the bonds, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Is it a bond or a promissory note?
They are all promissory notes. We no longer are doing 20-year bonds. That was something that changed last year. Now we can take them out as notes, which actually here you could probably, from Ellers, could probably explain better, but actually it saves, it simplified the process. We used to have to separate and have a resolution for every type of bond that we took out. Now they're simplified. We have one note for everything that we are borrowing that is exempt. And it gives us more leeway. It's not as specific, so we could say equipment, or and it gives you a little more leeway if you are unable to spend it down on the item you purchased, and otherwise it was a little more restrictive.
Okay.
Harry,
The notes used to be
Harry, are there
capped,
any
right?
other things that you could say are the reasons why we no longer are doing bonds versus notes?
No, I think you captured it really well. The biggest benefit is that previously you would borrow under the various resolutions for specific projects, but let's say you had a cost savings in streets and you weren't going to spend everything you borrowed for streets, you couldn't reallocate that to like a parks project or something. You had to use those funds for what you borrowed them for. Now, under the note statute, you can't reallocate. So if you have cost savings anywhere, you can reallocate to any project. So there's a huge benefit to actually being able to spend any type of excess proceeds that you might have from cost savings.
The term of the notes used to be capped, right? Like 3 years or 7 years or something like that?
Yeah, we used to be capped at 10 years. There's legislation last year to increase that repayment term up to 20 years. So essentially the same benefits as the bonds with less restrictions as bonds. So really no reason to borrow under the bond statute in this era. Yep.
Okay. Need a motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 2, consideration with possible action to approve a 3-month extension to the planning option for the development of the city-owned parcel located at 2855 Finger Road, parcel 2124. Any discussion?
Move to approve. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 3, consideration with possible action to approve K-9 transfer agreement for Puma with a planned retirement date of February 1st, 2025.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All right.
This dog lives right next to my neighbor, or my sister, so I see him a lot. He's he's out there with him a lot, not land.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 4, consideration with possible action to approve the purchase of 6 vehicles for the City of Green Bay Fire Department off the State of Wisconsin State Contract 505 ENT M25 vehicles 01 for the total amount of $359,130 from 2025 approved borrowing. Any questions or discussion?
Move to approve. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 5, consideration with possible action on the allocation of American Rescue Plan, ARPA dollars generated from interest revenue. Diana, do you want to give, or Dr. Allenbecker, kind of just a brief overview of the list that you provided?
Sure. What's in the packet is any money that we have generated from the City of Green Bay received the full ARPA grant over 2 tranches of payments, and we've received our $23.7 million. And while we were holding that money and had not spent it down, we have earned some interest income. As of through the end of 2024, we have received $2,628,000 worth of ARPA interest. And we have brought some requests to the Finance and to Council for approval. At this point, there has been $897,959,000 been approved at previous meetings. So with what was brought in versus what has been approved, some items have been paid in full and some have not. And that leaves us a balance of around $2.1 million. And then there are a few other items on here that have been, maybe these are options or items that we would like to use ARPA interest for. So this has been, basically, it has been, if the department heads have needed something, we have brought these back through to finance really one at a time. This number continues to build as we continue to still have a balance and have not spent it down. This ARPA interest account will continue to grow, but we don't know at what pace, and how long it sits and how soon we spend on the ARPA dollars.
So right now, you threw me when you said the 2.1. So
Okay.
right now, we have $1.8 million in the bank?
Nope, if you go down to the bottom box again, revenue, we have brought in $2,628,000, and we have paid $378,000, and there is still an additional $519,000 that has been approved, obligated, but not has actually been physically paid out. If you take that $900,000 down, you are correct, I did not give you a correct amount, $900,000 from the 2.6, you were probably 1.7. Probably remaining balance, and then there is about $700,000 worth of items that have been recommended, but have not gone through the council or finance for approval at this point.
So that available balance is correct or is not
The
correct?
variable of $1.8 million is correct, plus there are still $700,000 in the middle that have not been.
Okay, so we actually have 1.8.
1.7, yeah, 1.8.
But we haven't taken action.
On the
these
700.
recommended, right.
Right, so right now technically then there's 1.7, 1.8 in the bank.
Just kind of what, I asked for this agenda
Yep.
because I wanted to just, when we were even talking about ARPA funds in the beginning, I kind of said I wanted to look at it as a full picture because as we were narrowing things down, it was hard to figure out what was priority or important.
We were actually going to bring this item to you in the middle of the recommended, the fourth item down is a request for $30,000 for some Tyler cashiering equipment. So we decided not to make that a specific agenda item, but that is an item that if we don't discuss it this week, I would look to be bringing it back to the next finance committee meeting. We've had some failures in our cashiering equipment, and we just received a quote, and so we would be interested in asking for some ARPA interest.
So the ARPA dollars can't be used, like, can the interest be used to pay down debt?
It could be used for anything. There is no restrictions on these dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know there was some conversation between some of us around the Parks Committee request for the use of ARPA interest on one of their requests. And I know I brought up at that time that I'd received at least one other request from a different department head. And I think, at least I'm just speaking from my perspective, I would rather have all ARPA interest requests come through the Finance Committee, and I would like to capture that in a motion
Okay.
today, just because I think otherwise it's hard, to kind of get your arms wrapped around this stuff when it's sort of a scattered approach for who's making requests, and I think it's important that that be streamlined through one committee, and finance is, that's kind of our role. So I think, the other piece of this is we've talked about it, right? We've received requests piecemeal, and I think we didn't really have a sense of how much ARPA interest there even was. And so sometimes it's hard to make those decisions because not only do you not know what kind of balance there is, but also you don't know what other city priorities there are. So even this recommended list is helpful, but I would maybe follow that up with a question. And if I were to ask the department heads that are in here today, I'm sure they would tell you that they have a laundry list of things that they would love to have considered. So I think as a body, I think we ought to talk about what should that process look like. And of course, if the administration has an opinion on how they see that working, I think that's valuable too.
Well, and I have a question. Do we know, obviously with the ARPA funds initially, there was a deadline for allocation and a deadline for it to be spent. Is there any rules that we're aware of that this interest has to be spent by a certain time?
I'm not aware of any restrictions, any timeline for these dollars.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, of course,
Then
fire
it keeps
station,
growing.
police station, we've got some big
Yeah?
needs coming up, and I don't know how we're gonna bond for the amount of needs that we need. And that's why I just want to be really smart with this.
Especially since
Yeah,
there's
I
not a
would agree.
timeline and it keeps growing.
And there's obviously deferred needs as well, that.
Yeah, what
We haven't talked
haven't
about.
we done?
DPW trucks.
Exactly.
So you don't need an action necessarily today, right? More of awareness?
Correct.
So I would offer, recognizing it, we don't have to do this deep dive tonight. I would make a motion that, that all future spending requests requiring ARPA finance dollars would be directed through the Finance Committee and then receive and place on file the report.
Okay? Do you have a second?
Second.
I'm only going to clarify that you said ARPA, I would say ARPA interest dollars.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Do you have a question?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Don't all the big dollar items have to come through finance?
It's over, what, 50,000?
Anything
No.
over 50,000 needs to come through.
Okay, so if it was a parks project, would that end up having then to come through us to approve the dollars?
No, go
I can
through
explain
this.
what
Oh, it
happened.
does
There-
go through parks.
There was an item that
It
came
did.
through Park
That's
Committee.
what he's motioning.
There was an item that came through Park Committee on the last go-around, and they approved $55,000. So instead of coming to finance, they went to Park because the Park knew
But
the
it wasn't
program
good.
and it knew the park it was going to be going through. So instead of coming to finance, we had decided to, it ended up going through Park Committee.
Okay,
But for clarification, it wasn't ARPA interest designated for Parks Department. It was just a Parks item, which is why it went to the Parks agenda versus,
okay, got it.
which is what we're motioning to change.
And I think
Actually,
there's-
Clerk, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Alder.
Yeah, it actually was ARPA interest that was used for that, the double-decker container bar.
Right. And I think there's still space here to have the conversation around a procedure. I don't know that we're going to solve that today, which is why I suggest maybe some meetings with staff to talk about what that looks
I
like.
just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Yep, I agree. Okay. Any other questions or discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Number 6, consideration with possible action to approve 2024 Law Department budget carryover request for legal expenses in the amount of $164,880.92 for anticipated litigation and other legal costs continuing through the 2025 fiscal year. Do we need staff?
Yeah, I'd like an explanation I assume the closed session language is because we don't want to talk about the actual cases.
Correct.
So if you could just give us high level,
Sure, I'll start on the financial side, and then the attorney can speak to what they would be like to spend the dollars on. The very last page, I actually included a year-to-date budget report, and what happened is there was $186,000. I'm sorry, if you look at, in the middle of the page, there's a line item called legal expenses, and they had an operating budget of $60,000 for the normal annual ongoing operating expenses. They had a transfer in of $186,000 for some ongoing litigation items. And if you look in the last column, available budget, there is still $172,000 left that was unspent by the time the end of 2024 came around. So they got dollars carried over, they got extra dollars allocated to their bucket for 2 larger litigations, and at this point, the money has not been spent down. So the attorney is asking to carry over $164,000, so $164,880.92 of what is really an operating budget left of $172.
so is that carryover to help fund new cases, or is that carryover to help fund continuing cases?
That I will let the attorney speak to.
Yes, so that is on continuing cases, so on ongoing tax appeals and lease negotiations. So these are matters that originated prior, and whenever there's a contingency request that's approved, if all of that money isn't spent down, we have to do a budget carryover, otherwise it falls back down to the general fund.
Right.
So these were dollars that were originally approved and allocated for these particular items and matters. We're just wanting to make sure that we don't lose that and carrying it over as it's still continuing through 2025.
Okay, thank you. And I'm more supportive of that, right? If this was brand new stuff,
Right, nope,
Feel
just
differently, but-
continuing things that existed prior.
okay.
So when the budget went through, was that 168,000 was not a line item?
Not for the 2025 budget, so this was sitting in our 2024 budget. And so we didn't spend down everything, I think, in our operating expenses for legal expenses, but we're carrying over those specific figures that have been left, that haven't been spent down entirely for 2 particular matters, for the tax appeals and lease negotiations, which we know are going to continue on. And then our regular anticipated litigation expenses reset for the 2025 year.
So you planned for that when you did the
Yes,
budget?
those
Okay,
that's just
got it.
anticipated
It's
litigation
just
that
the
we
way it
generally
works.
budget for and understand can come. These are very specific needs that go above and beyond what we anticipate.
It's just hitting a different year than what we really planned.
Right.
I make a motion to approve.
Second?
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Informational, 2025 contingency account, $100,000, 2024 contingency account, $134,788. The next finance committee meeting will be held on February 25th, 2025 at 4:30.
To adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries, meeting's adjourned.